Before we start, if you're enjoying this podcast and you can see it adding value to you and the Australian screen industry, we have a small favour to ask.
Please subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Tell your fellow cast and crew, and in return, we promise to work as hard as we can to make this podcast as valuable to you as possible. Welcome to We Interrupt This Broadcast. It's your monthly roundup of everything that's happening in the Australian screen industry. I'm Julie Eckersley.
And I'm Kirsty Stark. And between us, we've been involved in hundreds of hours of screen stories, myself as a crew member and producer.
And me as a commissioner, producer and actress. We're here to bring the industry together, spark a conversation and keep you up to date.
So make sure to subscribe and follow us at We Interrupt Podcast on Instagram to join our weekly conversation.
Let's get into it.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Kirsty.
How are you? I haven't seen you since a few days ago at Screen Forever.
I know. Well, we were at Screen Forever all last week and we were roommates as well as going to heaps of sessions. What a week it was. I absolutely love this Screen Forever. How'd you go with it?
I came away feeling really validated. A lot of the conversations that I've been having over the past decade all seem to culminate this week. And I love spending time with you as well. I think a lot of people don't know that we actually probably had only spoken to each other for about a total of 4 hours in our lives before we started this podcast together. So I feel like we're really on the same page now and we know a lot about each other.
So we can agree and disagree a whole lot more, which I'm looking forward to doing. I think there was a concern because of the stress that the industry is under that it was going to be a really negative Screen Forever, but I certainly didn't feel that. How about you?
No, overall, it was very optimistic, I found. A lot of people looking towards the future and what's possible rather than focusing on the negative. And I think especially off the back of the federal election, there was this feeling of a shift towards a positive future for Australia in general and that the quotas will hopefully come through.
Though I would sort of say dig beneath the surface a little bit because I talked to a lot of producers, production companies who were on the development wheel but not necessarily on the production wheel, which is unsustainable long term for producers, of course. And I do think that beneath the surface there is real concern about what's happening and how things are changing. And you know what I thought was interesting, Kirsty, is that sort of reflects what the Screen Australia survey found, that hopeful and concerned combination that was coming up in those keywords from that survey.
Absolutely. And it obviously is still a hard market from a production perspective at the moment. I spoke to a couple of producers who were trying to get TV deals across the line. And there's a sense now that that's harder than ever. A lot of sales agents, they're putting a big fat zero against the US territory. So that is really concerning on the production front.
Yeah, some of the sales agents I talked to were also saying that they were being quite conservative in their choices right now, which that is something that needs to probably be negotiated at the moment with the lower distribution advances.
Really hard for independent producers, I think, but hopefully we start to see that shift.
Favourite keyword of the conference was niche. And, you know, we dropped that deep dive interview with Professor Amanda Lotz. You go back and listen to it, where she talks all about the end of mass media and the beginning and the rise of niche and micro media. So that episode felt really on trend for what people were talking about. How do we as an industry really tap into these powerful, passionate niches that can create sustainable business models for us? Were you hearing that as well?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because my word for the conference was sustainability. Sustainability in terms of the industry, individual production companies and people as a whole.
I really enjoyed your segment that you ran on sustainable businesses. I actually found it quite moving because I think for many of us who've been in this industry for quite a while, there is something unsustainable about the production models, the way we shoot, the hours that we shoot. What was the title of it, the session? Because it was really well framed.
We called it future-proofing your screen business by putting people first. And the idea is that without putting people at the heart of everything we do, we won't sustain an industry because they'll leave and go elsewhere. It was really about bringing it back to the heart of how do we protect our people while we pursue this great creative dream.
And you add to that the work that Ben and Jonathan have been doing in Screenwell and what their survey has found about mental health within our industry and stress and people planning on leaving. The session that Kirsty ran was a series of people getting on stage just talking about what they're doing. So Louise, what company was Louise from? She was so impressive. She's talking about the ground level training that everyone has to have when they come to work with her.
Yeah, Louise Schultz from Australian Production House is training people across a whole range of initiatives. We had crew members on the panel. We had Ben from Screenwell. And the stat that I always come back to in that survey that they've recently completed is 1 in 4 people who responded is looking to leave the industry in the next 6 months.
Wow. The other person that I loved hearing from was Patrick from Creative Australia, which is Creative Workplaces. The thing that he said that honestly it almost made me want to burst into tears was just really pulling out the fact that bullying in workplaces, which we know is pretty systemic in our workplace, bullying is actually illegal. Like, this is not about personalities. It's not about someone being difficult. It is illegal. And honestly, I just felt that was a really powerful statement.
I think it's sometimes so easy to get caught up in the status quo of how this industry has always been run and forget that what we do doesn't stand up to wider scrutiny. Monica Davidson, who was another one of the panelists from Creative Plus Business, actually brought up the Modern Slavery Act. And I think that is really hard hitting. If you take a look at that, there's a reason it's not being discussed and acknowledged in the creative industries because we unintentionally probably break it.
Wow, that's one heck of a statement. Something else I really loved about Screen Forever this year was people coming up to us telling us how much they appreciated this podcast. It was so moving, wasn't it? And I just want to say, anyone listening, thank you so much. We really appreciate you listening. You know, it is our commitment to help us all navigate these changes and to bring back to you as much valuable information as we can. So please keep talking to us. Please keep listening. Please like and subscribe, because this is a conversation that, you know, we're really facilitators of in a way.
The core of what we want to do with this podcast is to look to the future and see how the screen industry in Australia can do things in a better way. So whether that's looking at the online space and how we can navigate those new business models, all the way through to how we handle our production on a day-to-day basis. And I am planning to bring some of those panelists onto the podcast to have a more in-depth conversation.
A big seismic shift, I thought, in the programming, and a big call out to Jess for her incredible programming, was this is the first year that there was a significant percentage of the sessions that were really looking at the online and digital space. This year, and certainly the sessions that I was tracking through, were on that theme of, you know, YouTube or working in the digital space, working with creators. That was really exciting and really necessary. Did you go to any of those sessions, Kirsty?
I went to all of them, and I was so excited to see what I felt was the conversation finally catching up. I'm someone who, along with a lot of other creators in this country, started in web series about 12 to 14 years ago. And to see those, you know, niche web series conversations now happening in the mainstream space and being applied to television and long form production and the future of the industry, it felt at the same time like a breath of fresh air, but also a finally moment.
The term that I'm starting to use is platform agnostic television, and, you know, really getting flexible in terms of where our television is, how we think about it. And as we have to all come to terms with the fact that YouTube is television and YouTube is being watched on television, I think that changing the language that we're using so that we can expand our thinking and therefore expand our business models is really, really important. Did you go to the YouTube session with Chris Ledlin?
I did, yeah. They see the future of YouTube as a platform for long-form content. There's a lot of structural issues that need to be sorted out before that can happen. I'm actually working on that myself in trying to be able to geo-block and rights manage my content to be able to put it on YouTube. So I think there's a lot of negotiation to be done, both with the broadcasters and with YouTube itself, in carving that pathway for us to have that clear future. But yeah, it's good that those conversations now seem to be happening.
And with Chris, again, talking on behalf of YouTube, they are so clear that creators are their priority. And, you know, going back to Nat Lynch's deep dive interview, she was saying that sometimes with our broadcast partners or streaming partners, it doesn't feel that way. But YouTube, even though the business models and the finance isn't quite there yet in terms of sustainability, they really do have creators at the heart of that. And he put a slide up, which was really amazing, which talked about the YouTube ecosystem. Again, another really insightful thing, that our stories no longer can be one thing. You've got your long form or your originating content, and then it's how that spins off. How does that become film reels? How does that become a podcast? And all the different ways. And this is just within YouTube that you can spin that content out. Stretching our IP is going to be part of our sustainable business models moving forward, don't you think?
Yeah, especially because a lot of those spin offs can be done at relatively low cost compared to the actual long form production. So it's how to maximize the IP and the work that you've put into it in order to ensure that long tail and potential for monetization.
Big announcements at Screen Forever, also from Screen Australia.
Yes, and I was going to pick up on the platform agnostic side of things because that was one of the big keywords in their announcement of their 5 E's in their upcoming strategic plan.
Yes, the 5 E's, which are the backbone of Screen Australia's repositioning themselves and rethinking how they contribute to the market: empower, enrich, enable, engage, and elevate. But what do they mean, Kirsty?
Empowerment is very much about equipping the industry with insights and resources to stay ahead. So, a big data play and keeping us informed. I think that's one of the key things, as we spoke about last episode, that Screen Australia has the capacity to do well.
Absolutely. Data is the new gold. We know this has been a high priority for Deirdre, so helping us with that data is really, really important. Just a side note on that, looking at how data blind we are at the moment in terms of particularly working with the streamers. And again, when you think of how it was in network television or also how it is on YouTube, in both of those frameworks, you can have that minute by minute, when's the audience leaving, when are they dropping off, etc., information that can help us grow our stories. So empower and getting that data to us will hopefully remove that data blindness that we've had so that we can keep working with audiences more and more closely.
The second one was enrich, and this is about providing support beyond individual projects, so looking at business sustainability. And one thing that they announced is they're planning to build a private investment toolkit that will allow producers to go out and seek private finance and give us the capacity to be able to do that, which is going to be so necessary.
I think that's really, really interesting. I went to a panel that Lee Namo, who was at Screen Australia, now at Haven't You Done Well, was running, and he's been in the online space. And one of the things in that space that I hope this is kind of speaking to, he's saying is it's time now to move away from supporting people to do one online project in the way that you might support a television show and actually start moving into supporting online focused businesses and then letting them have the freedom to roll out content as they need to. And I think particularly because in the online space we see a faster movement of content, that's a really important change. So hopefully within the Enrich framework, we're seeing that kind of adjustment of thinking for Screen Australia.
We saw with enterprise funding what an impact that had for the most recent generation of companies kind of growing up and having that global perspective. And I think doing that in the online space is going to have a huge impact if they can make that happen. So the third E is enable. This is about enabling production. So the majority of the funding is planned to go to this section. What I thought was really exciting here is they announced a single application process. So your Screen Australia application will also be able to be played out against the other states rather than having to redo your application in the online portal every time.
Such a relief, because those applications obviously really important, but they can be really time consuming. So what a great, simple and effective way to assist the industry.
The other thing that got a huge cheer in this section was that they're bringing back short film support. Screen Australia is now going to be funding short films again.
I mean, this one, yes, for me, but this is a sort of watch this space, because I actually think the short film as a pathway is a bit dated. That depends, I guess, how it's being framed. Like, is the short film a proof of concept for a feature? I heard some other agencies talk about funding micro feature films. Now, the micro feature to me seems like a more exciting pathway. So I'm curious as to why short films and why not more online series. I don't really understand that one yet.
I'm more interested in why short films got a big cheer, and I think it's because there has been such an erosion over the last decade or so of pathways for emerging filmmakers and ways that they can find funding to get their first step. So it's not necessarily the short film itself, but what opportunities do we have for these new filmmakers who are coming in with stories they are so passionate to tell, to turn that into a viable pathway and a career for themselves. Alongside of this announcement from Screen Australia came the announcement of platform agnostic funding streams. And without knowing the full detail yet, I have some concerns there. I worry that without that online funding stream that people can go to specifically, that they're going to get thrown into the mix with more established filmmakers, and we're going to lose those pathways again.
Obviously, a lot of thought has gone into this, so I'm sure these things are being addressed, but it is good for us to be thinking about them and talking about them. What does it mean when everyone's in together at totally different levels, particularly when we know that television is getting hungrier and hungrier for more and more money?
One thing I did notice when places like Open Channel and Metro Screen disappeared about a decade ago is that more and more people coming into the remaining emerging programs were at that upper emerging, low mid-career stage. It seems it's almost causing a bottleneck in the funnel so that those first opportunities are happening later and later in people's careers.
I mean, that's happening on one level. And then we've also got these incredible digital-first companies like Glitch Productions, where we've talked to Jasmine Yang, and another company like that is Spawn Point Media. They're incredible. Spawn Point Media is a kids-focused YouTube channel. They've actually got 9 YouTube channels. They employ 100 people. They have a massive office in Collingwood, and they make Australian kids TV that plays globally and has had millions and millions and millions and millions of views. So as well as some people trying to find the legacy pathway, there's also just a whole lot of people who are going digital first and are not bothering with that short film pathway.
And maybe for Screen Australia, that focus still is on premium content, feature films, TV drama, and that's why they're funneling people back through short films. But I think we also need to be very open to all of the other possibilities that exist, because I am seeing more and more independent creators who have the tools at hand. They're going out into the world and making things, avoiding state agencies and Screen Australia altogether because they don't see a viable pathway for themselves there.
Yeah, and so even that language, how we create pathways, is like, how do we not necessarily create them, but actually support the ones that they're creating? Even talking to Glitch Productions, when Screen Australia funded them for a series, gave them that leg up, they were able to deliver through that pathway, and now they've created a sustainable business. Maybe it is coming back to what Lee said, give the business model a leg up and let them own the creative.
So the final 2 E's, engage, is about engagement with audiences, really focused on the value that Australian screen content creates for audiences, looking at things like audience testing in film development and ways to make sure that content is going to provide that value down the track.
Obviously, audience is where all of our minds are at and should be at. We are an audience-focused art form.
Yeah. And then the final E is elevate, which is about elevating Australia's profile through prioritising Australia's presence at key global events and markets and having a really targeted international strategy.
I absolutely love that. The conversations I've had before about that kind of brand Australia, which is really about how do we collectively market? How do we bring ourselves together in the way that we've seen Korea do, so that there is a brand recognition when something is Australian that actually is a rising tide for us all.
Yeah, so overall, I can see the real thought that's gone into these 5 E's.
There's an ongoing conversation with the industry, and this is to some extent a work in progress, even though obviously they've got a pretty strong foundation as to where they're headed now.
Yeah, I heard there's 10 key policy points that sit under each of those 5 E's, so I'm really excited to see the detail come out around that and what the shift in funding mechanisms will be.
Another big conversation that happened at Screen Forever was Hugh Marks, who's recently stepped into ABC, speaking publicly to the industry for the first time. Virginia Trioli interviewed him, and she's fantastic.
I love her.
Oh my goodness, she was just firing the questions and barely giving him time to think, which I absolutely loved. So good. He's smart. I mean, his responses were balanced and careful. He wasn't being pulled on anything, but I also thought was being good-humoured, and he seems to understand what is important to the industry about the ABC. What did you pick up on?
The thing that stood out for me was the rights issue. It feels like ABC is going to take on many more rights, or attempt to take on many more rights to content. And I think that's going to be a real test point with producers.
I agree. And I think the concerning thing for producers around that is, ABC taking rights and then not using them. And whether that's to do with marketing or where the content ends up playing, that has been the ongoing problem.
Yeah, I've had that situation myself with shows that I've produced that were on the ABC, and, they have limited resources and capacity that they can put towards each individual show. And as a producer, you want to be able to exploit your content and make it available and share it on social media and have those direct conversations with audiences as much as possible. And it seems like ABC wants exclusive rights to YouTube. They want exclusive rights to their own social media platforms and won't let you set up those opportunities to communicate directly with your audience. I found that really challenging, and I hope there's going to be more and more pushback from producers on that front, because if you can't talk to your audience, how are you going to drive people to the ABC? And those audiences don't want the entire ABC social media channels. They want to be on the platforms that serve them the exact content that they're looking for, and then they're happy to follow that funnel through to ABC and watch the show. But how are they going to get there?
Yeah, this has always surprised me about, some of our partners, is that we as producers have so much time and love and understanding of the shows that we've created. And it has always seemed strange to me that the resistance to really partner in terms of marketing as creators, as production companies, as producers, it's going to become more important than ever that we have that direct access, because the landscape's just getting so crowded and discoverability is a massive thing. Somewhere like the ABC, you're one of 20, 30, 50 shows. They don't necessarily have the resources to do it. So you hope that they're going to actually allow producers to really come on board to try and directly reach those audiences or those niches that the producer will know about and has passion for. Another thing that I thought was interesting about what he said was talking about what success looks like for the ABC, which he seemed pretty clear about. It was numbers plus perceived value and trust. If their numbers have grown but the perceived trust hasn't grown over his leadership time, that's ultimately not the package of success that the ABC and, SBS within that as public broadcasters should be delivering.
That's really interesting. It almost speaks to a bit of a political game in them, needing to win the trust in order to win the ongoing public funding.
That sort of equation does work. It is paid for by taxpayers' money. So taxpayers need to feel that they're getting value from the ABC for it to be sustainable. He was talking about the power of Australian IP, and that when we create some really powerful IP, obviously Bluey being a great pin-up for that, it actually gives back to our industry for generations. And so in response to that, he was saying that the ABC is going to prioritise Australian stories, and that the ABC should really be at the centre of developing those ideas. And he said that for SBS too, which I think is really important, because SBS does use a lot of formats. ABC has as well, but he was certainly calling it out as a real priority that they are a hub of development of original IP for Australia.
He was very adamant about less international formats on the ABC, and I think that's great. If our public broadcasters can't put the priority on Australian content, then who will?
Exactly.
Any final takeaways for you from Screen Forever?
I think the final takeaway was we're looking to the future as an industry. We know it's changing, and we're all in the midst of working out what that actually means.
Yeah, I think we're in a transition period. We need to figure out how to sustain ourselves. It feels like to some degree we're behind, but we now need to start pushing to get back ahead.
I think that's true. I think globally there are other countries that are further ahead. They're further ahead in AI. They're further ahead in brand integration as a source of finance. They're further ahead in private investment and maybe even that platform agnostic element. There's work to do, but we're on it. We've got some amazing people in leadership in this country and everyone is listening. There's work to be done and we're going to get it done.
Let's do it. Screen Forever aside, one of the big things happening this month was the federal election. We've seen Labor back in quite a landslide victory. What are your thoughts?
I love an election. A friend of mine calls it my grand final because I find it such an exciting night to listen to the country and go, what's going on? Because often you're in your own little bubble. I, along with everyone else, did not expect the Labor landslide. But given how Albo and Tony Burke had come out in support of the industry, I think it was, as good as we could have hoped in terms of our agenda and the quotas. And now we just got to see them deliver. This should be as easy as it's going to get for Labor to get some significant action and serve our industry. So fingers crossed.
And it's not a done deal yet. I think now is the time to really put that pressure on your local MP, whether they're newly elected or whether they're continuing on. If you haven't listened to our bonus episode on content quotas, all the information you need to do that is in there. So please spread the word widely and let's get these quotas across the line.
And speaking of politics, not to go down the rabbit hole, but the Trump tariffs came out the day before Screen Forever started. And it was such an interesting thing. Everyone was like, what? And then at the same time, they were trying not to go down that wormhole.
It was such an energy suck. Every media outlet was talking about it. You mentioned Trump in a sentence and all of the attention just goes that way. I actually find it quite disappointing.
He's a master of holding the conversation. The announcement was that there was going to be 100% tariffs on any screen content that wasn't made in America. No one knows what that means. Does that mean that if it's an American company but they shoot it in Australia, that would not work? Ultimately, it was just a lot of confusion. Also about practically how it would be applied. I think everyone came to the conclusion that we just had to stand back. That said, I will say within the 24 hours of that coming out, I heard of at least 2 projects that had gone on hold just because of the uncertainty that it creates. So these are projects that were coming to Australia or had a significant Australian component in it that were put on hold while people were going, hang on, is this project going to have 100% tariff? Because obviously that blows up a finance plan.
And that's the heartbreaking part, you know. He's out there talking a big game with nothing to back it up, no actual policy in place, and all of a sudden it affects hundreds and thousands of people's businesses and productions.
Yeah.
At the heart of it, I think he is hearing the conversation in America, especially in LA, that production is going elsewhere and he wants to protect that American institution of Hollywood production. But the world's changed. We're such a global industry now. So I'm hoping this plays out in a way that is beneficial to everyone across the industry.
Watch this space. Let's look at what is happening around the industry. There continues to be a bit of musical chairs going on in leadership. We saw Tim Phillips go to Warner's. Mike Jones has gone to BBC Scripted, and Drew Grove, who are the 2 parts of Every Cloud. Drew Grove is now the new head of production at Screen Australia.
Hugh Minh Luu, who was the director of content at Netflix Australia, has stepped down and they're now actively trying to fill that space.
Absolutely significant role. And did you hear that Weta FX are also going to establish a permanent Melbourne headquarters? Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, lots of infrastructure still being built and coming into the country, both from a company perspective and with all the studios being built at the moment.
And brilliant to see Lana Greenhalgh from Foxtel win Commissioner of the Year at the SPA Awards. So fantastic. What's in production around the country?
We have a big Netflix series shooting in South Australia. I don't think it's technically been announced, so I won't say the title, but it's the industry's worst kept secret. We also have the feature film Penny Lane is Dead shooting here. Over in Victoria, the Stan original series Gnomes has started production. That's a big one. And a lot of the international production still continuing up in Queensland. So yeah, quite a lot going on in the production front at the moment.
So exciting. We love lots in production.
So a big month, lots to think about in the wrap up from Screen Forever.
It was a lot of watch this space. You know, there's a lot of changes coming through, changes in Screen Australia, new head at ABC, and then just all of us watching the evolving landscape and to keep on learning and growing. I think that really is the time that we're in.
Yeah, if there's anything that you notice that you'd love to see us cover in future episodes, please write in, let us know what's happening in your corner of the industry. Just really keen to continue this conversation and create some of that transparency where we can all move forward and work together.
Absolutely. The more we have that visible information, whether it's data or new skills or understanding of where the money's flowing and how we can create those businesses, that is how we all thrive into the future. See you next month.
Now back to your regular programming.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.
We Interrupt This broadcast is hosted by Julie Eckersley and Kirsty Stark. This episode is brought to you by Expanding Media and Crew HQ.